Are we cranked up? We got volume. All right. Good morning. It's good to see all of you. We're actually back in a Bible class on Sunday morning. Let's see if we remember how to do this. We've been talking about things Jesus teaches us to do. The class is called Spiritual Exercise. We have one more class session after today, good Lord willing. That'll be next Sunday. And we're going to start talking about wisdom today. Jesus teaches us to be wise. I don't know if you consider yourself wise or not. Some of us have probably been called wise guys, which doesn't exactly mean the same thing. But at any rate, I think it's well worth our while to consider what Jesus says about wisdom, and not just what he says in the Gospels as he's quoted by the Gospel writers, but what the Scriptures as a whole say, because from Genesis to Revelation, the Bible is the Word of God. And so when we read anything in the Bible about anything, it is as though Jesus was saying it to us himself. So let's take a look first at what Jesus says, some of the things Jesus says. In the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus finishes the Sermon on the Mount, you remember how he finishes, what his wrap-up is for the Sermon on the Mount. Here it is in chapter 7 of Matthew's Gospel. It says, "Everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a what? To a wise man." How many of us know that song? Wise man built his house upon the rock. Wise man built his house upon the rock. So we've got an encouragement, an admonishment, an exhortation, if you will, from Jesus as he finishes these sayings. It says, the wise man is the one who takes these teachings of mine and puts them into practice, makes them part of his life. So the teachings themselves must be wisdom, because if a wise man's going to use them, he wouldn't use something that's not wisdom itself. And Jesus is saying the wise man is going to use what I've said. So here's his encouragement to wisdom without saying, be wise. He just says, here's what I'm teaching you. You know this is truth from me. The wise man will use these things. And that's how Jesus teaches us here the value of wisdom. We get into chapter 10, and he's sending his disciples out on what we now call the limited commission. And this is what he says to them. Remember, the limited commission sends out the 70 only to the household of Israel. This isn't to preach the gospel as we know it now, but to preach what? To preach the gospel of the kingdom, if you will. There in verse 7, he says, go preach, saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So get ready for it. This is why God sent John the Baptizer, to prepare people, prepare their hearts and minds for Jesus. And so he's teaching these disciples to go out and to tell people the kingdom of heaven is at hand. But this is what he says to them in verse 16. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be as shrewd. Some translations have as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves. So be as wise as serpents and harmless as doves. He's not sending these guys out on a military mission per se. He's sending them out on an evangelistic mission, and he's telling them to use wisdom. All right, how do you perceive wisdom? What is wisdom? When you think of wisdom, what do you think about? Good decisions. All right, Harold? How you use knowledge. The knowledge we have are facts and an understanding of certain things as they work, but the wisdom is how we use knowledge. That's what Harold's pointing out, and how many of us have heard that all of our life? Knowledge is facts. We need facts, but wisdom is the ability to use those facts. Anything else about wisdom?
The ability to act and discern before you make a choice.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes our choices are not very wise.
Discernment. What is discernment? But wisdom put into practice. One of the wonderful things about,
good choices.
Oh, I like that. The ability to use somebody else's experience. This is what parents do. As we raise our children, we're trying to tell them, don't do that. And the reason is, I've done that. That doesn't work. But as kids, what do we tend to do? Well, I'm going to try it myself because I might make it work better than my mom or my dad. But wisdom is when you see somebody else's experiences and you make use of them for yourself. Stop and think about that with regard to the Bible. How many things does the Bible tell us about what other people did and said and how it turned out for them?
Most of the time they were pretty much foolish.
A lot of times it was. Other times it wasn't. It was great. There are so many, like when I look at Mary, and I look at how when Gabriel came to her, she didn't argue. She didn't fuss. Well, she was humble about it, but she wasn't. Here's the thing about humility. Some things that we think are humility are actually pride. We're too proud to humble ourselves and accept, okay, maybe this is God's will for me. And that's what Mary did. Other people who do things with great courage and express great faith, like the centurion. Remember the centurion that Jesus marveled at? I've not seen so great faith in all Israel. The man was saying, I'm not worthy for you to come to my house. Just say the word and it'll take place. And Jesus was impressed. When I read about these kinds of things, I'm inspired. When I read about other kinds of things, like you're talking about, like Korah and Dathan and Abiram, who rose up against Moses as God's appointed leaders. And remember how they died? That's always been scary to me. The earth opened up and swallowed them. Whoa, that's not a good way to go. But everything we read about in the Bible is God giving us examples, and we can choose as wise people to follow the good and to avoid the bad. How many different kinds of wisdom are there? Two, Steve's holding up two fingers, two kinds of wisdom. What would those two kinds be? Now, I'm not going to press Steve to tell me what they are because he's volunteered the choice. How many might agree with that? All right, I see one hand in the back. What would the two kinds of wisdom be if there's only two kinds? Patty? Man's wisdom and God's wisdom. I like the way you put it because really that's where the two wisdoms diverge. One of the things that Jesus says that's interesting about wisdom, well, let's go and take a look at it. It's Matthew chapter 11. We're just right one page over from where we were in Matthew 10. Matthew chapter 11, verse 25. Jesus says, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and have revealed them to infants. What does that mean? That's where the divergence takes place. The wise and the intelligent. Was Jesus talking about those who are truly wise and truly intelligent? Or was he talking about those whom the world would label as wise and intelligent? What do the wise and intelligent people of the world say about the existence of the universe? It's an accident. Nobody planned it. Nobody intended for it. That's what the wise and intelligent of this world have to say. What do those wise in God say? You say, look at Genesis chapter 1. God spoke everything into existence except for man. Man he formed with his hands. Well, not necessarily his hands. It says he formed him from the dust of the earth, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living soul. So we've got two very divergent accounts of how the world came to be. Which one's idea, or which idea comes from an eyewitness? Yeah, because God was there. Now we say that by faith. We can't prove any of that, and I think that's an interesting thing about everything in the world, that there's so few things that can actually be proven. However, what we take on faith when we claim God spoke the universe into existence is the same thing everybody else takes on faith when they claim, no, it came by accident, because they can't prove that either. But the evidence, when you look at the evidence, how could anything come into existence? And talk about the Big Bang. There had to be more than one Big Bang. The Big Bang that brought the universe into existence. And then there had to be a Big Bang to create life. And then there had to be some kind of a Big Bang to create consciousness, because we've got all these things, and one Big Bang wouldn't explain all of it. There's just so much more to think about. But I'm digressing here. When you went to school, do you remember kids that were really good at math, or really good at English, or really good at athletics? And when I say good at athletics, not simply because they had strong bodies and were fast, but somebody who knew what moves to make on the basketball court, or what call to play on the football field, or when to steal second base. People who knew how to diagram a sentence. People who knew how to work formulas. There's all kinds of ways to be wise with knowledge. But there's only one kind of knowledge, one kind of wisdom that ascends above the level of physical life and goes into spiritual life, and that's the wisdom of God. And this is the wisdom that everybody can have. Sometimes I look at other people and, wow, they're wise. I wish I could be wise like that. But the thing the Bible teaches us is that we can. Because Jesus is, everything he says about wisdom is, you can do this. Be wise as serpents. He doesn't say, I'm going to endue you or give you, endow you with, miraculous wisdom. He just says, you go forth, you be wise. He's telling them, he's instructing them, you be wise, you be smart, you think about things. And that's what wisdom, you can't have wisdom if you don't think about stuff. You've got to think about things. Harold?
I think it's a learning process. For me, it certainly has been. When you go to school, you learn how to do things like solve equations or whatever. But if you have to learn that, you don't just walk into class and I know it all. And for me, trying to understand what the Bible teaches, I am so grateful that there are people that have studied the external evidences that support that in a very strong way. Then so when I get to read what's in the book, like Genesis 1,
right,
I can accept that because the external evidence says it's true, internal evidence says it's true. My wisdom keeps growing and growing and growing as I try to read and learn, and it's not over yet.
Right, and you put your newfound knowledge together with what you already know, and you ferret through all that to determine, yeah, this fits in with here, just like this says over here. And before you know it, you're responding with wisdom.
Sanctification. One of them is you belong to God, and the second one is you're trying to be more and more and more like him as you live through life, and that's a continuous process.
Right. He sets us apart by his salvation and his putting his spirit in us, but we set ourselves apart by continuing to gravitate towards sanctification. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good way to look at it. Wisdom is something we can all gravitate towards, we can all value. As a matter of fact, go back to Proverbs chapter 3. We're looking at Solomon's wisdom, but where did Solomon get his wisdom? He was inspired by the Holy Spirit of God. Everywhere we look in the Bible, whatever we read, it's as if we're reading the words of Jesus. What did John say about Jesus? He is the Word. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among men. So when John, what's that? All things came through him. When we read the account of creation where God said, let there be light, it was Jesus, who was his word, who brought the light into being. And then he's expressed as the true light when John talks about him in his gospel. So Jesus was at the creation, bringing all things into being because he was the word of God. And so when we read Solomon, we're still looking at everything that is of God, of Jesus, of the Holy Spirit. Here we are in chapter 3, verse 13. How blessed is the man who finds wisdom and the man who gains understanding, for her profit is better than the profit of silver, and her gain better than fine gold. You see what he's doing? He's personifying wisdom as a woman. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire compares with her. Long life is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all who hold her fast. Notice Solomon doesn't say some people have her and some people don't, because there's just some folks are dumb and they can't help it and they're always going to be dumb. He's talking about wisdom as someone you can get to know. But go to chapter 8. If you don't believe that from that, look at chapter 8. And he's still talking about this same woman he refers to as wisdom. Chapter 8, verse 1, does not wisdom call and understanding lift up her voice? On top of the heights beside the way where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gates, at the opening to the city, at the entrance of the doors, she cries out, to you, O men, I call, and my voice is to the sons of men. O naive ones, understand prudence. O fools, understand wisdom. Listen, for I speak noble things, and the opening of my lips will reveal right things. For my mouth will utter truth, and wickedness is an abomination to my lips. You see the divergent path that wisdom takes from sin and the darkness? Wisdom is always moving towards God, the true wisdom, not towards evil. Some people are wise in evil. Jesus even said the children of this world are wiser in their ways than the children of light. That's not very easy to hear, but he's talking about the wisdom of the world, and he says the children of this world are wiser in their ways than the wisdom of light. But Solomon is showing us that wisdom gravitates away from wickedness. Verse 8, all the utterances of my mouth are in righteousness. There is nothing crooked or perverted in them. They are all straightforward to him who understands, and right to those who find knowledge. Take my instruction, and not silver, and knowledge rather than choicest gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all desirable things cannot compare with her. We're going to continue reading, but think about the picture he's giving us of wisdom. She's like this woman. Where's she standing? She's at the intersection where the pathways meet. Where else is she standing? She's in the gates of the city where people have to come into the city and have to go out. She's in these places where everybody is passing through, going forth, and what's she crying out? Here I am. Here I am. You need me. I will do you good. I will bring you towards righteousness. I will lead you away from wickedness and abomination. That's what wisdom is crying out. Look at verse 12. I, wisdom, dwell with prudence, and I find knowledge and discretion. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogance, and the evil way, and the perverted mouth I hate. Counsel is mine, and sound wisdom. I am understanding. Power is mine. Isn't that interesting? Power is mine. Not the kind of power that's, power, I can get power over people. No, real power. The kind of power that is of God, that creates and brings forth good things. That kind of power, that kind of solidness. What's a better way to express that? But just real power. By me, kings reign and rulers decree justice. By me, princes rule and nobles, all who judge rightly. Verse 17 is my favorite thing it says. I love those who love me, and those who diligently seek me will find me. What does that say? This says if you're not wise, you can be. I'm going to ask for a show of hands. How many in here want to be wise? Because somebody might not raise their hand. Man, if I'm smart, I'll have to do more stuff. Yeah, well, that's the wisdom of the world telling you that.
You said wiser, it might be a little different.
Maybe so. Maybe so. But this is wisdom saying, here I am. You need me, and I want to do you good. If you love me, I will love you. If you seek me, you're going to find me. What did Jesus say in the Sermon on the Mount? Seek and you'll do what? And you'll find. Now, was he just talking about wisdom? He wasn't just talking about wisdom, but wisdom is included in that package, if you will. Because when we seek God, the more we seek God, the wiser we become in his ways and for life. Everything about God leads us to betterness. Is that a word? I'm going to call it a word. Everything about God makes us better, helps us to be better, helps us to be wise in a way that improves our lives and does in fact give us peace. But how do you get wisdom? How do you practice wisdom? Trial and error, okay.
There's many paths, but the paths have been laid out by God. He says if you look for those paths, you're going to find a path that's going to suit you.
Okay. So look for the paths that God has set out. Some of it's trial and error. Because how many times have you wanted to make a decision that was in agreement with what God said, but God didn't send you a letter or an email? Okay, here's what I want you to do. When's the last time you bought a car and it was a really expensive car? Or you bought a house. Wow, this is an expensive house. What about this neighborhood? What about the schools? How far is this from work? How far is this from church? See, this is where wisdom comes into play in our lives. It's making decisions. When's the last time you made a decision and you made a decision way too fast without consulting people you should have consulted, and especially without consulting God? I did that recently. I was talking to Debbie. I said, why didn't I pray before making this decision? And that's what we see in the Bible. We have examples of people who go to God in prayer when they have decisions that have to be made. And God always answers their prayers. And we have other folks. I remember especially, you remember what happened after Jericho? What a fantastic victory Jericho was. They marched around the city, blew some horns and shouted, and the walls fell down and they took Jericho. What happened at Ai? It's a different story. Why was it a different story? They did not ask God, hey, should we go up against Ai? It's like their victory at Jericho put them in a sense of confidence, and they said to themselves, hey, no problem. We took Jericho, we take Ai. Let's send a few thousand guys up there to take Ai. And they came back with their tails between their legs. What happened when they did that? That's when they asked God, hey, why did this happen? And God essentially said, you dummies. He didn't say that, but when I read it, it's like, yeah, if that was me, that would be what I'm thinking about myself. Why didn't I ask God? Because if they had asked God about Ai, God would have said, oh, do this and it'll be fine. Send 5 guys up there and you can take it. Or whatever. I know what's going to happen now. Somebody's going to say, Marty said the Bible said 5 guys went up and took Ai. That's how it works, isn't it? If this were a political speech, maybe so, but it's not. We can be wise. Jesus says, be wise. And he wouldn't tell us to be wise if it wasn't something to which we could attain. And wisdom has to do with making decisions about things. And you and I have to make decisions all the time. And now we're in a time where we're making crazy decisions. Are we going to come to church and risk getting COVID? Are we going to come to church, but we're going to sit over in the fellowship room? Are we going to come to church and wear a mask or not wear a mask? Are we going to shake hands with people out in the foyer? And if there was a letter that God sent telling us what to do about all this, I didn't get it. Would you email that to me, copy it, and paste it to my page or something? So we have to make decisions. about so many things. And it wouldn't be a big deal, except the heartache is we see people dividing over some of these decisions. So the need for wisdom in my mind and my heart is perhaps as much or greater now than it's ever been in my life. I need to be smart. I need to know how to behave towards everyone, but especially towards my brothers and sisters. And Jesus says, you can be wise.
It starts at home, by the way.
It does start at home. I agree with you. But what if you didn't get that at home? Can you still be wise if you didn't get it at home?
I meant the application, that's what I meant.
Yes, you're right. And it does start at home. That's where it should start. That's where it's designed to start. That's why in Deuteronomy 6 we read about the fathers being instructed. You talk to your children when you're lying down, when you're rising up, when you're walking in the way. You talk to them, but what do you talk to them about? Talk to them about my ways, my statutes, my commandments. You talk to them about the word of the Lord. Now, if you're talking to your children about the word of the Lord, what are you probably trying to do? How are you talking about it? Susie wants to go to the prom. What are you going to talk about? Oh, we can't go to the prom. Is that what we say? Well, maybe so. I don't know where you are in that. Or what if she does go to the prom? Are there any considerations if she goes to the prom? Boy, Marty's getting controversial here. He's talking about the prom. We're not even going to have one because we got COVID. But how is this relevant to our lives? What things would be relevant? If Susie does go to the prom, what's relevant? Social distancing right now with this, but okay, Susie, what are you going to wear? You're going to wear a dress, yeah, sure, a formal dress. How far is it going to come down in the front? Tell me we're not dealing with wisdom right here. How far is it going to come down in the back? Not only Susie, but Jimmy. Jimmy John, he's going to the prom too, maybe. Okay, Jimmy John. Are you going to ask a girl to the prom? How are you going to ask her? Are you going to take her a corsage? How are you going to treat her? What are you going to expect of your date when you're at the prom? Are you going to be a gentleman? This is the kind of stuff we deal with day in and day out. Now, not the prom, but the same kinds of things and the same kinds of decisions. What are we going to wear? What are we going to say? How are we going to interact? How much time are we going to spend doing this? How much time are we going to spend doing that? Right down to, what am I going to drive? Am I going to be frugal and buy an old piece of junk that I'm going to have to work on for as long as I've owned it? Or am I going to be wasteful and spend a lot of money on a car that'll be reliable for me for 10 years or whatever? What kind of a decision are we going to make? Maybe you don't have a choice. Maybe you don't have a choice but to be frugal. Who are you going to ask? If you're going to buy a car, what do you do if you're going to buy a car and you're not sure about it? You ever take a car to somebody that you know knows cars and say, hey, take a look at this, listen to the motor. What do you think about the brakes? How about those tires? See, that's the smart thing to do, using the knowledge that somebody else has. What does the Bible say about that? In the multitude of counselors, there is what? In the multitude of counselors, there is wisdom. Now, the assumption is you're talking to the right people. But if you know people who are good people. Years ago, I wanted to put together a lesson on raising children, on how to raise them, and not just raising them, but more specifically, how to discipline children. If you want to find out how to discipline children, who should you talk to? I'll see how wise you are. What if you talk to people who have grown children who have turned out pretty good? Would those be good people to talk to? Because I'll tell you what I discovered. Everybody's got an opinion about how you should discipline your kids. If we talk to people who seem to know what they're doing, we'll learn some stuff. What does wisdom say? I love those who love me. Those who seek me will find me.
Did Solomon have more than one wife?
Solomon had a bunch of wives.
Make a mistake.
If you are wise, does that mean you'll always behave according to what you know is wise? How many times have you and I said to ourselves, or even to somebody else, I knew I shouldn't have done that. I knew that wasn't a good thing to do. Here's another part of wisdom. You and I are people of flesh. We are a spirit with a body, and that body wants to go in directions the spirit knows better about. So if we are wise enough to know better, we need to be strong in that wisdom and pay attention to that, because to give in to the flesh amounts to foolishness. To be wise, we have to think about things. To be wise, we have to do some research. To be wise, we have to slow down and consider what is right. To be wise, we need to pray. If I ask God for wisdom, what does James say? Look at James. James makes a couple of observations about wisdom. There's going to be a bell when we're ready to wrap up, isn't there? Okay. This is what James says. James chapter 1, verse 5. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him do what? Ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. It doesn't say, if you lack wisdom, you can ask God, and if he thinks you're worthy of it, he'll give it to you. Somebody well said that wisdom, or good judgment, that's what it was. Good judgment, which amounts to wisdom, good judgment comes from experience. But most experience comes from bad judgment. When you make a bad judgment, you get yourself into a mess. That's when you learn stuff. Oh man, I shouldn't have done this. I'll never do that again. Titus.
That we remember how we're supposed to ask.
How we're supposed to ask. What's it say? In faith. Now here's the deal. If I ask God for wisdom, the only way I'm going to get it, because he's not going to say, okay, I'm going to miraculously give you wisdom. He could do that. But what I've found that God generally does is he puts me in situations where I have to work things out. I have to think about things. They're not always pleasant situations, but when I come out the other end, I can come out the wiser. I can be smarter. That might be how we get trained. And what do teachers do? You go to school and you're in math class. What does your teacher give you? What are they called to make you smart in math? What's that? Problems. They give you problems. I never thought to say, wisecracker though I was, I never thought to say, I got enough problems in my life. I come into math class and you give me more problems. If your teacher never gave you problems, would you have learned anything in math? Probably not. When you go into a literature class, what does a literature teacher do? Make you read The House of Seven Gables. Just shoot me. Make you read The Scarlet Letter. Stick a knife in me. A classic comic, but yeah, DC comics, yeah, or Marvel, either one, yeah, I bet. Louis L'Amour, anything, but man, the classics. But we read those things.
A lot of just basic, very easy reads.
He does, yeah.
Insight.
And there's a lot of wisdom in Louis L'Amour, yeah. Or Louis L'Amour, I'm not sure how he pronounces it. I haven't met the guy, but.
Have you ever noticed that when you come up to a situation and then you pause for a moment, you go, should I really be doing this?
Mm-hmm.
9 times out of 10, you should not.
Right?
Because something is talking to you, saying, not a good choice. And then when you go ahead and press on, you go, yeah, should have listened to my first impulse.
If you'll excuse the expression, a gut feeling, pay attention to your gut feeling. It may not always be right, but you better pay attention to it. How have I learned that? I've learned that by not paying attention to my gut. Yes, Harold.
How do you feel when somebody says, just follow your heart?
When somebody says, just follow your heart, I think, you don't know my heart. My heart is foolish. My heart has no brain whatsoever. There is a reason why you have a heart and a brain. And emotions are fantastic. Wouldn't it be horrible to be stuck in life without emotions, to not feel joy, to not feel love, to not feel the exhilaration of all the marvelous things God's given us? But feelings get you in trouble. It's like you've seen these pictures of adrenaline junkies. The guys who get on the bicycle and they ride this little narrow ridge. If you drop off that, it's 5,000 feet down that way and 6,000 feet down that way, and they're on this little tiny trail. You better be wise enough to know your skills, and you better be wise enough to have really checked over your bicycle or whatever you're riding on to know whether or not you can do that. And for my estimation, I'm thinking, is that even a wise risk if you know your skills and your equipment? Why risk that? But they are what's called adrenaline junkies. They feel like they need to do that for this excitement. And I'm thinking, oh, I'd rather live a few more years, because eventually it's going to catch up with you. How many of these videos have you watched where it's just videos about people hurting themselves? Guy gets on a house, 2 stories, 3, jumps off on a table. Watch me, I'm going to do a backflip and land on that table down there. And I'm not making this stuff up.
Did you see the guy, there's this famous cliff face in California, Kappa something or whatever.
Capitan?
Whatever. The guy free climbs it in like world record time with no ropes, no nothing, no pedons or nothing.
Right.
Just bare hands and feet.
Yeah.
He's no longer with us.
Oh, what happened?
Well, eventually that method caught up to him.
Oh, yeah.
But he was good.
He was good.
Oh, he scaled it in like 5 minutes or something. It was crazy.
Yeah.
But that type of behavior, he fell to his death.
That's hard. But that's life, and that's a life lesson. We can push the boundaries to some degree, but eventually the boundaries are going to catch up with us. And being wise is being able to say, should I push the boundaries at all? If there's a reason. I mean, people do crazy things for good reasons. Run out in front of a speeding car, the typical expression or the typical example we use to save someone from a certain disaster. That's one thing. But to risk, we talk about the wisdom of risking souls. People who push God away from them or who neglect God and so, well, I'll get around to that one of these days. Such a great risk involved in that. Or people who are members of the church and who know that there's something they need to do. They need to take care of this relationship. They need to make this apology. They need to go talk to this brother or sister. And they keep putting that off. That's not wise. Anything that we know God would lay on us, it's as if he's trying to fulfill James by giving us wisdom. If you go and do this, you'll come away from it wiser. Do it, whatever it is, whatever challenge God has put before you, whatever opportunity God has put before you, do it. Not simply for the wisdom. Wisdom will be a byproduct of doing the will of the Lord. And that's one of the great things about wisdom. You need it, but it's really a byproduct from doing what's right and exercising the best judgment you've got. And that's what we do in school as well, isn't it? Your teacher gives you a problem, and you look at that problem, and you make an honest effort, and you use your best judgment to come to a conclusion about that problem, and you take it to your teacher. What's your teacher do if they're a good teacher and you're wrong? He says, oh, well, Marty, here's what you did. Here's where you got off track right here. You see this? Oh, yeah, I see it. Okay. And I come away knowing I was wrong about that, but I'm wiser. I'm smarter. I can do better the next time. And I might not get it perfect the next time, but I'm going to come at it with a little more than I had this time. That's what teachers do. That's what God does. He brings us along to where we're smarter, we're wiser, we're stronger, we're better, we're more holy. And that's what wisdom is all about. Well, Lord willing, we can come back to some of this next week. Got more things to say about wisdom, but I hope you picked up something in this today, and you'll leave today being inclined to seek out wisdom, because she is standing in the intersections of our lives. She's standing at the gates, calling out to us, here I am, come and get me. Thank you so much for your kind participation in class. Class is dismissed.